The gunshot echoed across the vast plains of Wyoming Territory like a promise of death, sending a flock of startled crows into the crimson sky. Yates Zimmerman didn't flinch as the bullet whistled past his ear, but instead calmly adjusted his worn Stetson and urged his Paladin stallion forward, leaving behind the dust of Sweetwater County and the bounty hunters who'd been tracking him since Colorado. It was the summer of 1878, and Yates had spent 3 years running from a crime he didn't commit. At 32, his face was weathered by sun and hardship, dark stubble covering a strong jaw and eyes the color of a stormy sky. Once a respected rancher with land to his name, now he was just another drifter with a price on his head, moving from town to town, taking odd jobs and sleeping under the stars more often than not. As dusk descended, turning the vast Wyoming landscape into a tableau of purple shadows, Yates spotted an abandoned homestead in the distance. The main house had collapsed years ago, but the barn still stood barely, its weather-beaten boards groaning against the wind that swept across the prairie. It would provide shelter for the night, away from the prying eyes of lawmen and bounty hunters alike. Yates dismounted, his boots crunching on the dry earth as he led his horse toward the decrepit structure. The air smelled of sage and coming rain. He needed to get inside before the storm hit. "Easy now, Phoenix," he murmured to his horse, a magnificent black stallion that had been his only faithful companion these past years. "We'll rest here tonight." As he approached the barn, Yates noticed something odd, a rusted padlock on the door, new enough to seem out of place on such an abandoned property. His instincts, honed by years of staying one step ahead of the law, prickled with warning. Someone had locked this barn, and recently. Phoenix whinnied softly, as if sensing his master's unease. Yates tied the reins to a nearby post and drew his Colt revolver from its holster. The weight of the weapon was familiar in his hand as he approached the barn door cautiously. That's when he heard a muffled sound from within. A voice. "No voices, female voices, hello," he called out, pressing his ear against the weathered wood. "Is someone in there?" The voices inside fell silent, then erupted in a cacophony of pleas. "Help us, please, we're locked in. For God's sake, get us out of here." 3 distinct voices, 3 women trapped inside an abandoned barn in the middle of nowhere. Yates holstered his pistol and examined the padlock. It was solid iron, impossible to break with his bare hands. "Stand back from the door, ladies," he called. Looking around, he spotted an old plow with a heavy iron blade leaning against the side of the barn. It would serve his purpose. With a grunt, Yates hefted the rusted implement and brought it down hard against the hasp holding the padlock. Once, twice, 3 times the metal protested but held. On the 4th strike, the rotted wood around the hasp splintered, and the lock fell uselessly to the ground. Yates pulled the barn door open, and for a moment was blinded by the contrast between the fading daylight outside and the darkness within. As his eyes adjusted, he made out 3 figures huddled together in a corner, blinking at the sudden intrusion of light. They were dressed in tattered clothing, their faces smudged with dirt, hair tangled and unkempt. They shielded their eyes from the sunset's golden rays streaming through the open doorway. Without hesitation, Yates stepped inside. "You ladies all right?" The tallest of the 3, a woman with striking auburn hair and wary green eyes, spoke first. "We've been locked in here for days." "That monster said he'd be back." Her voice trailed off as she tried to stand, her legs buckling beneath her. Yates rushed forward, catching her before she hit the dirt floor. "Easy now. How long have you been without food and water?" 3 days, maybe 4, said the second woman, younger than the first, with blonde hair and a southern accent. "We lost track of time in the dark." The third woman remained silent, her dark eyes wide with fear or shock, Yates couldn't tell which. She couldn't have been more than 20, with black hair and olive skin that spoke of Mexican heritage. "My name's Yates Zimmerman," he said, deciding there was no point in using a false name with these women who needed his help. "I'm going to get you all out of here." "Katherine Sutton," said the auburn-haired woman who was now leaning heavily against him. "These are my sisters, Abigail and Alina. Yates nodded. "Miss Sutton, can you walk?" Katherine attempted to take a step, but swayed dangerously. "I'm afraid not. None of us can. We've been tied up until just this morning when he said he'd be bringing men to see the merchandise." A cold anger settled in Yates's gut. He'd heard about operations like this, women kidnapped and sold to mining camps or brothels across the territory. "No one's selling anyone," he said firmly. "I'm getting you out of here now." Without further discussion, Yates scooped Katherine into his arms. She was lighter than she should have been, her body frail from days of captivity. "I'll come back for your sisters," he promised, carrying her toward the doorway, toward the fading light. As he stepped out of the barn, Katherine turned her face up to the open sky and began to weep silently, tears cutting clean tracks down her dirt-stained cheeks. Yates set her down gently in a patch of soft grass, then returned for Abigail. The younger Sutton sister tensed as he lifted her. "How do we know we can trust you?" she whispered, her blue eyes sharp despite her weakened state. "You don't," Yates replied honestly. "But right now, I'm offering you a choice, which is more than whoever locked you in here was going to give you." Abigail nodded slowly, accepting his logic. As he carried her into the light, she gasped at the beauty of the sunset, as though seeing it for the first time. Perhaps, in a way, she was. Elena, the youngest, was trembling as Yates approached her. She spoke rapidly in Spanish, words he couldn't understand, but her meaning was clear. She was terrified. "It's all right," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "No te voy a lastimar." It was one of the few Spanish phrases he knew. "I won't hurt you." Slowly, cautiously, Elena allowed him to lift her. She was the lightest of the three, barely more than a girl despite being a woman grown. As Yates carried her into the open air, her eyes widened at the sight of the vast Wyoming sky, painted in strokes of orange and purple as the sun made its final descent. With all three women now outside, Yates quickly assessed their condition. They were dehydrated, hungry, and exhausted, but otherwise unharmed physically. The emotional wounds, he suspected, would take longer to heal. "My horse can't carry all of us," he explained, retrieving his canteen from Phoenix's saddlebag, "and whoever locked you in there might return. We need to move quickly." Katherine took a small sip of water when he offered it, careful not to drink too fast. "There's a town about 2 days' ride east of here," she said. "Ember Creek. We were on our way there when we were ambushed." Yates frowned. He knew Ember Creek, a rough mining town with more saloons than churches, and no place for 3 unaccompanied women. "Where were you headed before that?" "West," Abigail answered, taking her turn with the canteen. "Our father died 6 months ago. We sold our farm in Missouri and were going to San Francisco to live with our aunt." Elena finally spoke, her English accented but clear. "Our wagon driver betrayed us. He and another man drugged our tea at a campsite. When we woke up, we were in that barn." Yates's jaw tightened. He'd seen too much of the world's cruelty not to believe their story. "All right, here's what we'll do. There's a creek about a mile north of here. We'll make camp there tonight, get you ladies fed and rested. Tomorrow morning, I'll scout the area, make sure no one's coming back for you." Katherine, who seemed to be the unofficial leader of the sisters, nodded her agreement. "Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. We have no money to offer you. They took everything, but we're in your debt nonetheless." Yates waved away her thanks. "No debt. I couldn't leave you there, and no decent man would." He helped Katherine to her feet, steadying her with a hand at her elbow. "Can you ride? You can take Phoenix, and I'll walk alongside." Katherine looked at the imposing stallion with trepidation. "I've never ridden anything larger than a pony." "He's gentle enough," Yates assured her, though gentle wasn't exactly the word most would use to describe the temperamental stallion. Still, Phoenix seemed to sense the gravity of the situation and stood patiently as Yates helped first Katherine, then Abigail, onto his back. Elena balked, however. "I cannot," she whispered. "I am afraid." Without argument, Yates lifted her into his arms again. "Then I'll carry you, Miss Elena. It's not far." As they set out toward the creek with the last light of day guiding their way, Yates couldn't help but wonder what twist of fate had led him to this moment. He'd spent 3 years avoiding human connection, staying one step ahead of the law, trusting no one. Now, he was responsible for 3 vulnerable women in a dangerous territory. The weight of Alina in his arms was a stark reminder of how long it had been since he'd touched another person with anything approaching tenderness. She'd fallen asleep almost immediately, her head resting against his shoulder, exhaustion finally claiming her. Ahead, Katherine sat straight-backed on Phoenix, her auburn hair catching the last rays of the setting sun, turning it to liquid fire. Despite her ordeal, there was a dignity about her that spoke of inner strength. Abigail sat behind her sister, arms wrapped around Katherine's waist, her blonde head bent in exhaustion. As darkness fell and stars began to pepper the vast Wyoming sky, Yates realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't just running from something, he was running toward something. These women needed protection, and for now, at least, he would provide it. The creek came into view as the moon rose, a silver ribbon cutting through the prairie. Yates helped the sisters dismount and set about making camp, gathering firewood and starting a small, controlled flame that would provide warmth without attracting unwanted attention. From his saddlebags, he produced jerky, hardtack, and coffee meager offerings, but the women ate gratefully, savoring each bite as though it were a feast. As the fire crackled and night settled fully around them, Katherine finally broke the silence. "Why are you helping us, Mr. Zimmerman?" she asked, her green eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "You're risking a lot for strangers." Yates poked at the fire with a stick, watching sparks rise into the darkness. "Maybe I'm trying to balance my ledger," he said cryptically. "Are you running from something?" Abigail asked, always the direct one. Yates smiled faintly. "Isn't everyone out here running from something, Miss Abigail?" Alina, who had awakened and eaten a little, spoke softly. "In my village, they say a man who helps without asking for reward is either a saint or a fool." "I'm certainly no saint," Yates replied, meeting her dark gaze across the fire. "So I suppose that leaves fool." Katherine studied him thoughtfully. "No, I don't think that's it either. I think you're a good man who's seen bad things, perhaps done them too." When Yates didn't respond, she continued, "You don't have to tell us your story, Mr. Zimmerman, but know that whatever burden you carry, you've earned some grace tonight." Her words struck him more deeply than he cared to admit. Grace was something Yates had stopped believing in long ago. Around the same time, he'd stopped believing in justice or mercy or any of the other noble concepts that seemed to have no place in the brutal reality of the frontier. "Get some rest," he said, changing the subject. "I'll keep watch. Tomorrow will be a long day." The sisters arranged themselves close to the fire, using Yates's spare blanket and saddle for makeshift bedding. Soon, their breathing deepened into the rhythm of sleep, leaving Yates alone with his thoughts and the vast, star-strewn sky above. He found his gaze repeatedly drawn to Katherine's sleeping form. Even in repose, there was something compelling about her, a quiet dignity that adversity had failed to dim. In the 3 years since his wife Sarah's death and the subsequent murder he'd been wrongfully accused of, Yates had avoided allowing himself to feel anything beyond the basic instinct for survival. Yet something about Katherine Sutton stirred emotions he'd thought long buried. As the night deepened and the fire burned low, Yates made a decision. He would see these women safely to the nearest proper town, not Ember Creek with its rough miners and rougher justice, but perhaps Laramie or even Cheyenne. After that, he would continue his solitary journey. It was safer that way for everyone. Dawn broke clear and cool, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Yates, who had dozed only fitfully during the night, his senses alert for any sign of pursuit, rose to check their surroundings. The prairie stretched empty in all directions, the only movement the gentle waving of tall grass in the morning breeze. He returned to find Katherine awake, washing her face in the creek. The water had revived some of her natural color, and with the dirt and grime removed, Yates could see she was strikingly beautiful, with high cheekbones and a determined set to her jaw. "Good morning, Mr. Zimmerman," she said, straightening up and pushing damp tendrils of auburn hair from her face. "Any sign of trouble?" "None," he replied, trying not to stare. "And please call me Yates. Mr. Zimmerman makes me feel like someone's schoolmaster." A faint smile touched her lips. Yates, then, and I'm Katherine, not Miss Sutton. I think after you've rescued someone from being sold into servitude, formalities can be dispensed with. He nodded, appreciating her directness. Katherine, how are your sisters? Still sleeping. Yesterday took a toll on them, on all of us. She hesitated, then added, thank you again. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along. I do, Yates said grimly, and it's not worth dwelling on. You're safe now. Katherine's green eyes searched his face. Are we safe, I mean? You keep looking over your shoulder, scanning the horizon. Are you expecting someone to follow us? Yates considered deflecting but decided on honesty. Not for you specifically, but I have my own reasons for preferring to avoid the law. You're wanted, she stated rather than asked. Yes. For what? Yates stared out across the prairie. Murder, but I didn't do it. To his surprise, Katherine didn't recoil or ask for details. She simply nodded. I believe you. Her simple declaration of faith, offered without evidence or reason, stunned him. You don't know me, he pointed out. I know you broke into a barn to rescue 3 strangers when you could have ridden on. I know you're sharing your provisions and risking your freedom to help us. Those aren't the actions of a murderer. She paused. At least, not the kind of murderer the law should be hunting. Before Yates could respond, Abigail and Alina began to stir. The moment of connection between him and Katherine lingered in the air like the morning mist over the creek, ephemeral but undeniable. Breakfast was a quiet affair, more jerky, the last of the hardtack and strong coffee that brought color back to the sisters' cheeks. As they ate, Yates outlined his plan. We're about 60 miles northeast of Laramie. It's a 4-day journey on foot, less if we can find horses for all of you. There's a small settlement called Riley's Crossing about a day's ride from here. We might be able to buy or barter for mounts there. We told you we have no money, Abigail reminded him. Yates patted his saddlebags. I have enough to get by, been saving my earnings from odd jobs. Katherine frowned. We can't ask you to spend your savings on us. You're not asking, I'm offering, Yates said firmly. Besides, horses will get us to Laramie faster, and the sooner you ladies are safely in a proper town with a proper sheriff, the better. Alina, who had been quiet all morning, suddenly spoke up. What about the men who took us? Shouldn't we report them to the authorities? A shadow crossed Katherine's face. Would anyone believe us? 3 women traveling alone, accusing men of kidnapping us for nefarious purposes. The sheriff in Laramie might, Yates said, though he wasn't entirely convinced. Law on the frontier was often more concerned with property than justice, especially when it came to crimes against women. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Katherine decided. For now, our priority is reaching safety. With that settled, they broke camp, covering all signs of their presence as best they could. The sisters were stronger after a night's rest and food, though still weakened from their ordeal. Yates insisted that Katherine ride Phoenix again, with Alina behind her this time. Abigail, the strongest of the 3, walked alongside Yates as they set out across the rolling prairie toward Riley's Crossing. The day grew hot as the sun climbed higher, but a merciful breeze kept the worst of the heat at bay. Yates kept a vigilant eye on their surroundings, alert for any sign of pursuit, whether from the sisters' captors or bounty hunters on his own trail. Tell me about San Francisco, he said to Abigail as they walked, partly to pass the time and partly to keep her mind off her fatigue. What's waiting for you there? Abigail's face brightened. Our Aunt Victoria, our mother's sister. She married a shipping merchant and moved west 20 years ago. She's written to us about the city, how it's growing, full of opportunity. After Father died and the farm failed, it seemed like our best option. And what will you do there, you and your sisters? Abigail shrugged. Katherine was a schoolteacher back in Missouri. She hopes to find similar work. I've always had a way with numbers. Perhaps I could work as a clerk or bookkeeper. And Alina, a shadow crossed Abigail's face. Alina has had a difficult time. Our mother was Mexican, you see. She died when Alina was just a baby. Father remarried, and our stepmother. She trailed off. Wasn't kind to her, Yates finished, understanding. Abigail nodded. She treated Alina like a servant, not a daughter. Katherine and I did our best to protect her, but we weren't always successful. When father died, our stepmother wanted nothing to do with any of us, least of all Alina. So we're her family now, Katherine and I. Yates glanced ahead to where Alina sat behind Katherine on Phoenix, her face turned up to the sun, eyes closed as if drinking in the freedom of the open sky. She's lucky to have you both. We're lucky to have each other, Abigail corrected. After a moment, she added, and now we're lucky to have found you, Yates Zimmerman. The sincerity in her voice made Yates uncomfortable. He wasn't used to gratitude or to being seen as someone's salvation. For 3 years, he'd been the man people avoided, the drifter who kept to himself, who took his meals alone at the far end of the bar and slept with one eye open. Being cast as a hero didn't sit right with him. I'm just doing what anyone would do, he muttered. Abigail laughed, a surprisingly light sound given their circumstances. Is that what you think? That anyone finding 3 women locked in a barn would risk their neck to save them? You haven't been paying attention to the world, Mr. Zimmerman. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps his years on the run had made him forget that there were still good people in the world, along with the bad. Or perhaps he simply didn't want to acknowledge the possibility that he might be one of them. By midday, the prairie gave way to more varied terrain, rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen, the creek they'd been following widening into a proper stream. They stopped to rest in the shade of a cottonwood grove, Yates sharing out the last of his jerky and refilling the canteen from the stream. Katherine dismounted stiffly, her legs unaccustomed to riding. How much farther to this Riley's Crossing? If we keep up this pace, we should reach it by tomorrow afternoon, Yates replied, helping Alina down from Phoenix. The young woman's hand lingered in his for a moment longer than necessary, her dark eyes meeting his with unspoken gratitude. And you're certain we'll find horses there? Katherine pressed. No, Yates admitted, but it's our best bet. Riley's Crossing is small, but it's on a cattle drive route. They usually have mounts for sale or trade. Katherine nodded, accepting his logic. She moved to the stream's edge, kneeling to splash water on her face. The sun caught in her auburn hair, turning it to flame. Yates found himself transfixed by the simple grace of her movements, the quiet strength evident in the set of her shoulders. You're staring, Abigail said softly from beside him. Yates started, embarrassed at being caught. I wasn't. It's all right, Abigail smiled. Katherine has that effect on people, always has. Yates cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. We should get moving. I want to cover more ground before sunset. As they prepared to continue their journey, a distant sound caught Yates's attention, the rhythmic pounding of hoofbeats, growing louder. He tensed, hand moving instinctively to his colt. Into the trees, he ordered the sisters, his voice low and urgent. Now. Katherine recognized the danger immediately, hurrying Alina and Abigail into the shelter of the cottonwoods. Yates led Phoenix deeper into the grove, away from the stream where they'd be easily spotted. They didn't have long to wait. Within minutes, 4 riders appeared on the crest of a nearby hill, silhouetted against the blue sky. From his hidden vantage point, Yates could make out rough-looking men, trail-worn and heavily armed. Is it them? Katherine whispered, her face pale. The men who took us, Yates shook his head. Can't tell from here, but they're following the creek just as we are. The riders descended the hill and approached the stream, dismounting to water their horses exactly where the group had rested minutes earlier. Yates tensed as one of the men knelt, examining the ground. Tracks here, the man called to his companions. Fresh ones, horse and people on foot. How many? Asked another rider, a burly man with a bushy beard. Hard to say, at least one horse, maybe 3 or 4 people. The bearded man spat into the dirt. Could be them. The description matches 3 women and a man. Yates felt Katherine stiffen beside him. These weren't random riders, they were looking specifically for them. Spread out, ordered the bearded man, clearly the leader. They can't have gone far. As the riders remounted and began to search the area, Yates made a quick decision. We need to move now, he whispered. Stay low, follow the stream bed. The water will hide our tracks. The sisters obeyed without question, wading into the shallow stream and moving as quietly as possible downstream, away from the searching riders. Yates led Phoenix, grateful for the stallion's training that kept him from whinnying or otherwise alerting the pursuers. For nearly an hour they moved through the water, the cold seeping into their bones but fear keeping them going. Finally, when the sounds of the search had faded completely, Yates led them back onto dry land in a small clearing surrounded by dense pine. Who were they? Elena asked, teeth chattering from the cold water. Bounty hunters, Yates said grimly, but not for me. They were looking for you three and whoever helped you escape. Katherine wrapped her arms around herself, less from cold than from the realization of their danger. The man who locked us in the barn, he said he had buyers waiting, men who would pay well for women like us. Yates's jaw tightened. Then we need to be even more careful. Riley's crossing isn't far, but we'll avoid the main trails from now on. Will they keep looking for us? Abigail asked, fear evident in her voice. Yes, Yates answered honestly. There's money involved and men like that don't give up easily. Katherine straightened her shoulders, a determined look replacing the fear in her eyes. Then we'll just have to be smarter than them, all of us together. Her confidence bolstered the group's spirits as they continued their journey, now taking a more circuitous route through the hills, staying under tree cover whenever possible. The day wore on, the sun beginning its westward descent, casting long shadows across the land. By nightfall, they had covered less ground than Yates had hoped, the detour and careful progress slowing them considerably. They made camp in a sheltered ravine, foregoing a fire despite the chill in the air. The risk of the light attracting attention was too great. As they huddled together for warmth, sharing Yates's blanket and what remained of his provisions, Katherine spoke softly. Tell us your story, Yates, the real one. If we're risking our lives together, we deserve to know who we're with. In the silver moonlight filtering through the pine boughs overhead, Yates studied the faces of the three sisters, Katherine's steady gaze, Abigail's curious eyes, Elena's quiet attentiveness. Something about their trust in him, despite knowing he was a wanted man, loosened the tight hold he'd kept on his past. I had a ranch near Denver, he began, his voice low. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. My wife Sarah and I built it from nothing. We were happy there. He paused, the memories washing over him like a physical pain. 3 years ago, Sarah took sick, fever. The doctor in town couldn't do anything for her. She died in my arms on a Tuesday morning in April. Elena made a soft sound of sympathy, but Yates barely heard it, lost in the past. After the funeral, I started drinking. Spent most of my time at the saloon in town. That's where I met James Blackwell. He seemed friendly enough, bought me drinks, listened to my troubles, said he had a business proposition that could help me get back on my feet. Yates laughed bitterly. Turned out his business was robbing stagecoaches. I refused, of course, told him to leave me alone. A week later, the stagecoach was robbed anyway. The driver was killed, shot in the back, and somehow my gun was found at the scene. Blackwell framed you, Katherine said, understanding dawning in her eyes. Yates nodded. By the time I realized what had happened, the sheriff was at my door with a warrant. I panicked, ran, been running ever since with a $500 bounty on my head. But you're innocent, Abigail protested. Surely you could prove it somehow. How? Blackwell had friends in town, people who swore they'd seen me planning the robbery with him. It was my word against theirs, and I was the grieving widower who'd been drinking himself into oblivion for months. No one was going to believe me. Katherine was quiet for a long moment, absorbing his story. So that's why you were so quick to help us, she finally said. You know what it's like to be powerless against injustice. Yates hadn't thought of it that way, but perhaps she was right. Perhaps in saving these women, he was trying to reclaim some small measure of the justice that had been denied to him. I'm sorry for what happened to you, Katherine continued, her voice gentle, but I'm not sorry you found us. Whatever brought you to that barn yesterday, I'm grateful for it. There was something in the way she looked at him, not with pity, but with understanding that touched Yates more deeply than he cared to admit. For the first time in years, he felt seen as a man, not as a fugitive or a drifter or a bounty to be collected. We should try to get some sleep, he said, uncomfortable with the intensity of his own emotions. Tomorrow will be another long day. As they settled down for the night, Katherine ended up beside him, their shoulders touching beneath the shared blanket. In the darkness, her hand found his and squeezed briefly before withdrawing. "Good night, Yates," she whispered. "Good night, Katherine," he replied, equally soft. Sleep was long in coming for Yates that night, his mind filled with thoughts of auburn hair and green eyes, and the surprising comfort of human connection after years of solitude. Morning arrived with a heavy mist that clung to the trees and dampened their already sodden spirits. They ate a meager breakfast of the last scraps from Yates's provisions, their hunger only partially satisfied. Water, at least, was plentiful from the nearby stream. "Riley's Crossing should be just over that ridge," Yates said, pointing to a line of hills in the distance. "We'll reach it by midday if we keep a steady pace." The sisters, though still weakened from their ordeal, had proven remarkably resilient. Even Alina, the most fragile of the three, walked with determined steps beside her sisters, her dark eyes scanning the terrain ahead. As they crested a small rise, Phoenix suddenly tensed, ears flicking forward. Yates held up a hand, signaling the sisters to stop. "Something's wrong," he murmured, drawing his Colt. They stood in tense silence, listening. At first there was nothing but the whisper of wind through pine needles. Then faintly came the sound of men's voices, carried on the breeze from somewhere ahead. "Down," Yates ordered, and they all dropped to the ground, crawling forward to the crest of the hill. Below them, in a small clearing, were the same 4 men they'd seen the day before. They had made camp and appeared to be arguing among themselves. Their horses were tethered nearby, saddled and ready to ride. "They're blocking our path to Riley's Crossing," Katherine whispered, her face grim. Yates nodded. "We'll have to go around them. It will add hours to our journey, but we can't risk an encounter." As they began to retreat, Alina's foot dislodged a stone that clattered down the hillside. The bounty hunters below fell silent immediately, heads turning toward the sound. "Run," Yates said urgently, "into the trees. Now." The sisters didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled to their feet and fled, Yates following with Phoenix's reins clutched tightly in his hand. Behind them, shouts erupted as the bounty hunters spotted their movement. "There they are. Get the horses. Don't let them get away." The sounds of pursuit grew louder as the bounty hunters mounted their horses and gave chase. Yates knew they couldn't outrun mounted men on foot. "Katherine," he called, "take Phoenix, all of you ride together, head east through those trees, I'll lead them away." Katherine's eyes widened in alarm. "We can't leave you." "You have to," Yates insisted, helping her onto Phoenix's back. "Get to Riley's Crossing, find the sheriff, tell him everything." Abigail and Alina scrambled up behind their sister, the stallion snorting in protest at the unusual burden but standing firm. "Yates, please," Katherine begged, reaching down to grasp his hand. "Come with us." The pounding of hooves was growing closer. There was no time for debate. "Go," Yates ordered, slapping Phoenix's flank. The stallion leaped forward, carrying the 3 sisters away into the dense forest. Yates turned to face the approaching riders, positioning himself in a small clearing where he would be clearly visible. As the first bounty hunter burst through the trees, Yates fired a shot into the air. "Looking for me," he shouted, then turned and ran in the opposite direction from where the sisters had fled. The ruse worked. With a shout, the bounty hunters changed course, following him as he crashed through the underbrush, leading them deeper into the forest and away from the women. Yates was fast and knew the terrain better than his pursuers, but he couldn't outrun horses indefinitely. His only advantage was the dense forest, which forced the riders to slow down and navigate carefully between the trees. After nearly an hour of cat and mouse through the woods, Yates found himself cornered at the edge of a steep ravine. The 4 bounty hunters approached cautiously, spreading out to cut off any escape route. "End of the line, mister," said the bearded leader, dismounting and drawing his pistol. "Where are the women?" Yates stood his ground, Colt aimed squarely at the leader's chest. "What women?" The leader's face darkened with anger. "Don't play dumb. The 3 ladies you took from that barn, they're worth a lot of money to the right buyer." "I don't know what you're talking about," Yates replied evenly. "I'm just a drifter passing through." One of the other bounty hunters, a thin man with a scar running down his cheek, laughed. "Wait a minute, Hank. Look at him close. I think we got ourselves a bonus here." The leader, Hank, squinted at Yates. What are you talking about, Lucas? That's Yates Zimmerman, Lucas said, grinning nastily. Wanted for murder in Colorado, $500 bounty on his head. Hank's eyes lit up with greed. Well now, ain't that something? We came looking for stolen property and found ourselves a murderer too. I'm not a murderer, Yates said, his voice steady despite the desperate situation. And those women aren't property? Don't much care what you are, Hank replied, raising his pistol. Dead or alive, that bounty pays the same. Now where are the women? Gone, Yates said simply. Beyond your reach, Hank's face contorted with rage. We'll see about that, boys, take him. Before the bounty hunters could advance, a rifle shot cracked through the air. Hank cried out in pain as the bullet grazed his arm, causing him to drop his pistol. The next one goes through your heart. Katherine's voice rang out from the trees to Yates's left. Stunned, Yates turned to see Katherine emerge from the forest, a rifle presumably taken from Phoenix's saddle scabbard aimed steadily at the bounty hunters. Behind her came Abigail and Alina, each holding a pistol with determined, if inexpert, grips. Katherine, what are you doing? Yates demanded, equal parts angry and amazed. Saving you, she replied, not taking her eyes off the bounty hunters. As you saved us. Hank, clutching his bleeding arm, glared at the women. You think you can shoot all of us, lady? I don't think so. Perhaps not, came a new voice, deep and authoritative, but my deputies and I certainly can. From the trees behind the bounty hunters emerged 3 mounted men wearing deputy badges, rifles trained on Hank and his companions. Sheriff Taylor, the lead deputy, introduced himself. Riley's Crossing. Would someone like to tell me what's going on here? In the sheriff's office in Riley's Crossing, little more than a sturdy cabin with a single cell attached, Katherine recounted their ordeal. Sheriff Taylor listened grimly, taking notes in a leather-bound ledger. Human trafficking, he said when she'd finished. Been hearing reports of women disappearing along the trails, but this is the first solid evidence we've had. Will you be able to find the man who locked us in that barn? Abigail asked. The sheriff nodded. With your descriptions and the location, we stand a good chance. These 4, he jerked his thumb toward the cell where Hank and his companions were confined, will likely be more cooperative once they realize the charges they're facing. He turned to Yates, who had been standing silently by the door throughout the sisters' testimony. Now, Mr. Zimmerman, I understand there's a matter of a Colorado warrant we need to discuss. Yates tensed, his hand instinctively moving toward his Colt before he caught himself. Sheriff Yates is innocent, Katherine interrupted firmly. He was framed by the real murderer, a man named James Blackwell. Sheriff Taylor raised an eyebrow. That's so, and you know this how, Miss Sutton? Because I know Yates, she replied with conviction. He risked his life to save us when he could have simply ridden on. That's not the action of a murderer. The sheriff studied her for a long moment, then turned back to Yates. Blackwell, you say? Interesting. Had a man through here about a year back, calling himself Blackwell. Nasty piece of work. Got himself killed in a card game down in Santa Fe, from what I heard. Yates felt a surge of disbelief. Blackwell is dead, if it's the same man, yes. Left behind quite a reputation: robbery, fraud, murder, the kind of man who might frame an innocent for his crimes. Sheriff Taylor stroked his mustache thoughtfully. I can send a wire to Denver, make some inquiries. If your story checks out, Mr. Zimmerman, we might be able to clear your name. The possibility of freedom after 3 years on the run was almost too much for Yates to comprehend. He found himself unable to speak, overwhelmed by a rush of emotions he'd kept tightly controlled for so long. Katherine moved to his side, taking his hand in hers. Thank you, Sheriff, she said, her voice steady though her eyes shone with unshed tears. That would mean everything. Sheriff Taylor nodded, a hint of a smile beneath his mustache. In the meantime, the town's in your debt for helping bring down these bounty hunters. The hotel down the street has rooms available on the house, courtesy of Riley's Crossing. As they left the sheriff's office, stepping into the late afternoon sunlight, Yates found himself surrounded by the Sutton sisters, Katherine still holding his hand. I can't believe you came back for me, he said, finally finding his voice. You could have been killed. Katherine smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her since their meeting. "We couldn't leave you behind, not after everything you've done for us." "It was Katherine's idea," Abigail added. "She insisted we circle back once we reached the edge of town." Alina nodded enthusiastically. "She said we were not leaving our cowboy to face those men alone." "Your cowboy?" Yates raised an eyebrow, unable to suppress a smile. Katherine blushed but didn't look away. "Figure of speech." The hotel was a modest two-story building with clean, simply furnished rooms. The sisters were given a large corner room with 2 beds, while Yates was placed in a smaller room across the hall. After days on the trail, the promise of hot baths, clean clothes, and real beds seemed like unimaginable luxury. That evening, freshly bathed and dressed in clothes borrowed from the hotel's lost and found collection, they gathered in the hotel dining room for their first proper meal in days. The conversation flowed easily, the shared danger having forged a bond between them that transcended their brief acquaintance. As the meal concluded, and Abigail and Alina excused themselves to return to their room, exhaustion finally catching up with them, Katherine lingered at the table with Yates. "What will you do now?" she asked softly. "If the sheriff clears your name," Yates contemplated the question, swirling the remains of his coffee in his cup. "I haven't thought that far ahead. For 3 years, all I've done is run. The idea of stopping, of building something again." He shook his head. "It's hard to imagine." "You could come with us to San Francisco," Katherine suggested, her eyes carefully fixed on her own cup. "I hear it's a place for new beginnings." The invitation hung in the air between them, weighted with possibilities Yates had denied himself for too long. "Katherine," he began, uncertain how to respond. She looked up then, meeting his gaze directly. "I know it's sudden. We've known each other for barely 3 days. But in those 3 days, you've shown more character, more decency than most men show in a lifetime." "You don't know everything about me," Yates warned. "The things I've done to survive, I know enough," she interrupted. "I know you're a man who would risk his life for strangers. Who would face down bounty hunters to protect 3 women he just met. Who carries grief and injustice without letting it turn him cruel." She reached across the table, her hand covering his. "That's the man I've come to care for, Yates Zimmerman." The warmth of her touch, the sincerity in her green eyes, broke through the walls Yates had built around his heart. For the first time since Sarah's death, he allowed himself to feel something beyond grief and bitterness, a tentative hope for a future he hadn't dared to imagine. "I care for you too, Katherine," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I should, given the circumstances." Her smile brightened. "The circumstances are what brought us together. I'm not one to question fate's methods." Before Yates could respond, the hotel owner approached their table. "Mr. Zimmerman, Sheriff Taylor asked me to give you this." He handed Yates a folded piece of paper. With a sense of trepidation, Yates opened the note. As he read the sheriff's message, his expression transformed from wariness to disbelief to overwhelming relief. "What is it?" Katherine asked anxiously. Yates passed her the note, his hand trembling slightly. The sheriff received a reply to his telegram. James Blackwell confessed to the stagecoach robbery and murder before he died in Santa Fe. He named his accomplices, the same men who swore they saw me planning the robbery. The Colorado authorities are withdrawing the warrant for my arrest. Katherine's eyes filled with tears of joy. "You're free," she whispered. "I'm free," Yates repeated, the words strange and wonderful on his tongue. They sat in stunned silence for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of the news. Then, with a boldness that surprised them both, Katherine stood, moved around the table, and kissed Yates full on the mouth. The kiss was brief but filled with promise of healing, of new beginnings, of a future neither had dared hope for just days ago. When they separated, both were smiling, cheeks flushed with more than just the warmth of the dining room. "Come to San Francisco," Katherine said again, this time not as a suggestion but as a certainty. "Come with me." And in that moment, with the weight of his past finally lifted from his shoulders and the woman who had brought light back into his life standing before him, Yates Zimmerman made the easiest decision of his life. "Yes," he said simply, "I will." 2 weeks later, the stagecoach to Cheyenne departed Riley's Crossing carrying 4 passengers. 3 sisters and a cowboy who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. From Cheyenne, they would take the train west to California, to San Francisco and the new life awaiting them there. The journey was long but filled with a sense of anticipation rather than fear. Each mile put more distance between them and the dangers they had faced, bringing them closer to the future they now shared. Katherine and Yates's relationship deepened with each passing day. What had begun as a chance encounter had blossomed into a love neither had expected, but both embraced wholeheartedly. They spoke of dreams long deferred: Katherine's desire to open her own school, Yates's knowledge of ranching that might find new purpose in California's fertile valleys. Abigail and Alina watched their sister's happiness with approval and a touch of amused exasperation at the couple's obvious infatuation. Alina, especially, had flourished since their rescue, the shadow of her difficult past receding in the light of new possibilities. By the time they reached San Francisco in early autumn, with its fog-shrouded hills and bustling harbor, the 4 travelers had become a family of sorts bonded by shared hardship and mutual care. Aunt Victoria welcomed them all with open arms, her spacious home on Nob Hill providing ample room for her nieces and their unexpected companion. "So you're the cowboy who rescued my girls," Victoria said to Yates on their first evening, her sharp eyes assessing him over dinner. "Katherine tells me you're a man of exceptional character." Yates shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny. "I just did what needed doing, madam," Victoria's stern expression softened. Modesty, too, a rare quality in a man. She glanced at Katherine, noting the way her niece's eyes lingered on Yates. "Well, Mr. Zimmerman, it seems you've made quite an impression on my oldest niece." Katherine blushed. "Aunt Victoria, please." The older woman laughed. "Don't please me, Katherine. I've been around long enough to recognize love when I see it, and I approve," she added with a nod to Yates. "A man who would risk everything for those in need is a man worth keeping." In the months that followed, they settled into new routines and new roles. Katherine secured a position teaching at a school for girls, while Abigail found work as an assistant to Victoria's husband in his shipping office. Alina, still healing from her past, helped around the house and slowly began to explore the city, her natural artistic talent finding expression in sketches of the harbor and hills. Yates, with a loan from Victoria's husband, purchased a small livery stable on the edge of the city. His knowledge of horses and their care quickly earned him a reputation for quality and fair dealing. The business thrived, and within 6 months, he had paid back the loan and begun setting aside savings. Through it all, his relationship with Katherine deepened, moving beyond the intensity of their first meeting to something more solid: a partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and an abiding love that had taken them both by surprise. On a clear spring day, nearly a year after their fateful meeting in Wyoming, Yates took Katherine riding along the beach south of the city. The Pacific stretched endlessly before them, its vast blue expanse a fitting backdrop for the question Yates had been carrying in his heart. As they dismounted to walk along the shore hand in hand, Yates found himself thinking of how far they had come, not just in miles, but in healing and hope. "I never thought I'd find happiness again," he said, watching the waves break against the sand. "After Sarah died, after everything that happened, I thought that part of my life was over." Katherine squeezed his hand. "And now," Yates turned to face her, the sea breeze ruffling her auburn hair, "now I can't imagine my life without you in it." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. "Katherine Sutton, will you marry me?" Katherine's green eyes widened as he opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring set with a single pearl. "Yates," she breathed. "I know it's not diamonds," he began, suddenly uncertain. "It's perfect," she interrupted, tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. "And yes, yes, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, Yates thought of the twisted path that had led him to this moment: the grief, the injustice, the years of running. All of it had brought him here, to this woman, to this love. From darkness into light, he murmured against her hair. Katherine leaned back to look at him, understanding in her eyes. That's what you did for us, carried us from the darkness into the light. And you did the same for me, Yates replied, drawing her close once more. They were married that summer in Victoria's garden, with Abigail and Alina as attendants and a small gathering of friends they'd made in their new life. The sheriff from Riley's Crossing made the journey to attend, bringing news that Hank and his bounty hunters had been sentenced to prison for their crimes, and that the man who had imprisoned the sisters had been caught and would face justice. As Katherine and Yates exchanged vows beneath an arbor of roses, Alina leaned over to whisper to Abigail, "Do you remember when we were in that horrible barn, and I said I thought no one would ever find us?" Abigail nodded, blinking back tears. "And I told you to have faith that someone would come." "I never imagined it would be him," Alina said, watching as Yates gently lifted Katherine's veil, "or that he would become our brother." "The best kind of brother," Abigail agreed, "one who chose us." As the years passed, the memory of those terrifying days in Wyoming faded, though they were never forgotten. The lessons learned of courage, of trust, of the unexpected ways that lives can intersect and change forever remained with them all. Katherine and Yates welcomed their first child, a daughter named Sarah Victoria, 2 years after their wedding. A son, William, followed 3 years later. Their home, built on a hillside overlooking the city and the bay beyond, became a gathering place for family and friends, a testament to the life they had built together from the ashes of their separate pasts. Abigail eventually married a young lawyer she met through Victoria's husband, while Alina found her calling as an artist, her paintings of Western landscapes gaining recognition and acclaim. The 3 sisters remained close, their bond only strengthened by the trials they had faced together. On the 10th anniversary of their meeting, Yates and Katherine returned to Wyoming, bringing their children to see the land where their parents' story had begun. The abandoned homestead was gone, reclaimed by the prairie, but the memory of what had happened there remained vivid. Standing in the tall grass where the barn had once stood, Katherine took Yates's hand. "It seems like another lifetime," she said softly. Yates nodded, watching their children chase butterflies through the wildflowers. "In a way it was. We were different people then, were we?" Katherine smiled. "Or were we always who we are now, just waiting to find each other?" Yates considered this, remembering the man he had been bitter, alone, running from his past. And yet, when the moment came, he had chosen to help 3 strangers in need, to risk his freedom for their safety. Perhaps Katherine was right. Perhaps the core of who they were had always been there, waiting for the right circumstances to reveal itself. "Maybe so," he said, pulling her close. "Either way, I'm grateful every day that I found you." "That you carried us into the light," Katherine added, echoing the words that had become a touchstone of their shared history. As the Wyoming sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the vast prairie in shades of gold and amber, Yates and Katherine gathered their children and headed back to the waiting horses. They had a train to catch, a journey home to begin. But in a sense, Yates reflected as he helped his daughter into the saddle, they had been home all along from the moment he broke down that barn door and carried 3 frightened women into the light. From the moment Katherine looked at him not as a fugitive, but as a man worthy of trust and, eventually, of love. Their story had begun in darkness, in fear and desperation. But it had led them here, to this life they had built together, to these children who carried their hopes for the future, to a love that had healed old wounds and opened new possibilities. And as they rode away from the place where it all began, Yates knew with absolute certainty that every step of their unlikely journey, every hardship, every moment of courage, every choice that had seemed impossible at the time had been worth it. For it had brought them here to each other, to the light they had found together and would keep burning bright for all the days to come.